The beacon had been transmitting for 14 months before I heard it. Not because it was quiet. It was loud enough. It was punching through 3 relay bands on a carrier frequency that any half-awake comms operator would catch inside 30 seconds. I caught it in 20. The problem wasn't the signal. The problem was that everyone else had already heard it and decided not to care. I was posted to Relay Station Kestrel 9, which is the kind of posting that tells you exactly where you stand with your commanding officers. Kestrel 9 sat in the outer drift of the asteroid belt, 40 minutes from the nearest supply route and about 4 career mistakes from anywhere interesting. The crew was 4 people, rotating shifts, mostly silent. The coffee machine had been broken for 6 weeks. I had been fixing it every 3 days with a stylus and 2 stripped bolts, and every 3 days it broke again. And that was the most exciting thing that happened on Kestrel 9 until the morning the Veth signal came through on Channel 7. I had my coffee cup in my hand when I heard it. I did not put it down. I turned up the gain with my other hand and sat very still, the way you sit when your brain is moving faster than your body has agreed to. It was a distress beacon. Standard 7-language format, the kind the Galactic Accord required all registered civilizations to use so that any member species could identify it immediately. The Veth had followed the protocol exactly. They had done everything right. 7 languages, clean carrier wave, repeating loop, coordinates embedded in the header. Then I heard the 8th frequency. It was running underneath the main signal, woven into the carrier itself. A different transmission entirely, smaller, shorter. The frequency range was narrow, too narrow for most standard receivers. I almost missed it, and I have been doing comms work for 11 years. It was built for small lungs. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I pulled the Veth file from the Accord database. The file was 22 pages. I read all of them in about 8 minutes, which is not my fastest reading, but I kept stopping. Not because the language was complicated. The language was very simple, clean bureaucratic sentences, professionally written, the kind of writing that makes terrible things sound like weather reports. The Veth were a species of approximately 600,000, the file said, pre-industrial stage of development, non-combatant, occupied a single planet in a non-strategic system, no significant mineral deposits, no jump-capable technology. Their genetic catalog had been archived by the Accord's Preservation Division as a standard precautionary measure. Archived. I read that word 3 times. The file had 2 stamps at the bottom, both red, both from the Galactic Accord's Emergency Response Committee. The first stamp was dated 11 months ago. The second was dated 9 months ago. Both said the same thing in the Accord's formal language, which I will translate here into plain words. Not worth the cost. I put my coffee cup down. It was cold anyway. I opened the secondary analysis attached to the file. It was 4 pages of cost-benefit calculation, resource expenditure for an intervention mission versus projected return value. The Veth had no resources the Accord wanted. They had no military capacity. They had no political allies. They had no leverage of any kind. The calculation came out negative both times, which is why there were 2 stamps instead of 1. Someone had requested a second review. The second review agreed with the first. I closed the file. Then I opened it again because I wanted to make sure I had read it correctly, and I had. I opened a comm channel to my commanding officer, Colonel Dana Briggs, who was stationed at Meridian Base and who I had spoken to exactly twice in the past year. I told her I had intercepted a Veth distress beacon on Channel 7, 14 months in transmission, and that the Accord had reviewed and declined twice, and that there was a secondary frequency in the carrier wave built for small lung capacity, and that I thought someone should respond. Dana listened. I could hear her breathing. Then she told me it was outside our jurisdiction. She told me it was not our signal. She told me to log it and move on. I told her I understood. She ended the call. I sat in the silence of Kestrel 9 for about 90 seconds. The asteroid belt drifted outside the window, slow and indifferent. the way space always looks when you are trying to think. The broken coffee machine made its usual sound, which was a low, grinding click that I had stopped hearing weeks ago and was now hearing very clearly. I picked up my personal comm unit. I did not open a channel to Dana Briggs. I opened a channel to a man named Owen Clark, who was a supply pilot I had known for 6 years, and who had a decommissioned hauler called the Persistent Argument sitting in Bay 4 at Callisto Depot, waiting on a parts certification that had been delayed for 3 months for bureaucratic reasons that did not actually involve the parts. Owen picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need to ask you something." He said, "Is this the kind of thing I should be sitting down for?" I said, "The chair won't help." He was quiet for a moment. "Send me the coordinates." I sent them before he finished the sentence. Then I logged the beacon, filed it properly. Timestamp, frequency, data, file reference number, the works. I did everything Dana had asked me to do. I also booked 3 days of personal leave, which I had not taken in 7 months, and which was technically owed to me. I packed 1 bag: medical kit, cold weather gear, 2 changes of clothes, the stylus I used to fix the coffee machine because I find it calming to have something to fix. I did not look at the file again. I already knew what it said. I already knew what it didn't say. 600,000, the file said. Non-combatant, pre-industrial, not worth the cost. 14 months, that beacon had been running. 14 months of a signal looping into empty space, while 2 committees reviewed the numbers and stamped their decisions and went home. 14 months of small lungs, transmitting on a frequency that almost no one could hear. I could hear it. I picked up my bag. I walked out of Kestrel 9 without looking back, and the coffee machine made its grinding click behind me, and I let it. Owen's ship smelled like recycled air and machine oil, and something he claimed was a pine air freshener, but which I had privately suspected for years was just a pine-shaped piece of plastic doing nothing. The Persistent Argument was not a beautiful vessel. She was a Class 7 freight hauler with a retrofitted cabin, 2 working engines out of 3, and a navigational display that had a dead pixel in the exact center that Owen had drawn a small face on with a marker. She was the best thing I had seen in months. Owen Clark was 41 years old, had done supply runs for the outer colonies for 15 years, and had the specific kind of calm that comes not from having an easy life, but from having survived enough difficult ones that new problems had stopped being surprising. He shook my hand when I boarded, which is a thing he always did, and handed me a cup of actual hot coffee, which is a thing I almost wanted to cry about but did not. "Who else?" he asked. 2 more, I said, landing in 40 minutes. The first was Nina Voss. She was a field medic who had spent 4 years working for an off-world aid organization before the funding collapsed, and the contracts disappeared, and the whole operation folded without enough notice to get her equipment off the last station. She arrived with 2 supply cases she had apparently packed before I called her, which told me everything I needed to know about Nina. She had short red hair and a way of moving through a space like she was already planning the fastest route through it. She looked at the ship, looked at me, and said, "The medical bay." "There isn't one," I said. She nodded as though this was the answer she had expected. "I'll make one." The second was a young man named Cal Deering. He was 23. He had been stationed at Callisto for 8 months and had, in that time, filed 2 formal complaints about equipment safety conditions and 1 suggestion for improving the waste recycling system, none of which had been acknowledged. He had heard about the beacon from a shared frequency log and had sent me a message that was 3 sentences long, and the 3rd sentence was, "I want to come." I almost told him no. He was young. His boots were new enough that they still made noise when he walked. I told him yes instead, because the recalled mission I could not stop thinking about had taught me that the people who ask to help and get told no carry that no with them for a very long time. We launched at 3:40 station time. No formal clearance. The parts certification on the Persistent Argument was still pending, technically, but Owen had filed a provisional exemption that was real enough to hold up for 48 hours, and 48 hours was all we needed to get far enough out that turning us around would cost more than letting us continue. I spent the first 6 hours of the journey reading the VETH file again, not because the information had changed, because I wanted to understand exactly what I was flying toward, and I wanted to understand it clearly, without the specific numbness that official documents try to build into you by making terrible things sound like logistics. The VETH had lived on their planet for as long as their records went back, which was a long time. They had a written language, 14 regional dialects, a music tradition that apparently used harmonics humans could not fully perceive, and a system of agriculture sophisticated enough that they had been managing the climate of their southern continent deliberately for 300 years. The file mentioned these things in a section titled Cultural Notes, which came after the section on mineral deposits and before the section on projected population decline. The projected population decline. I read that section very carefully. The VETH's decline was not a disease. It was not a natural disaster. It was a slow thing, a grinding thing. Another species, a full Accord member, had been operating extraction infrastructure in the VETH system for 11 years. The VETH had filed formal objections. The objections had been received. They had been assigned reference numbers. They had been reviewed by a subcommittee, and then a committee, and then a secondary committee, and then a review board. And at every stage the conclusion was the same, which was that the matter required further study. 11 years of further study. In those 11 years, the VETH's water supply had been contaminated in 4 regions. Their agricultural yield had dropped by 38%. 2 of their coastal settlements had been abandoned because the extraction drilling had destabilized the geological shelf beneath them. And their population, which the file noted had once been 600,000, was now listed as approximately. I stopped. I went back. The file said 600,000. That was the archived figure. I had read it a dozen times. But at the bottom of the population section, in a footnote so small it almost looked like a formatting artifact, there was an updated estimate, not official, flagged as provisional, added by a Accord census analyst 8 months ago. 112,000. The main file had not been updated. The stamp at the top still said 600,000. The red stamps at the bottom still said not worth the cost, and they had been issued against a population figure that was 5 times larger than the reality, which meant the calculation had been wrong, which meant the committee had stamped a death sentence based on numbers that were already out of date when they reviewed them. I sat with that for a long time. Nina came and found me. She looked at the screen. She didn't ask what I was reading. She went back to building her medical bay out of cargo straps and supply cases and whatever else she could find. And the sounds of her working were steady and focused, and somehow more comforting than anything anyone could have said. We dropped out of transit 12 hours later. The planet was green from orbit. That was the first thing. It was genuinely, deeply green, the kind that means something is still alive and working despite everything trying to prevent it. Owen brought us down through the cloud layer on manual, which he always preferred, and the land resolved below us in patches of forest and open ground, and then the settlements. What used to be settlements? I will not describe what I saw in detail, because the detail is not the point. The point is that the Accord file had used the word affected. That was the word. The VETH communities in the northern region were affected by the extraction operations. I now knew what affected meant in that file. We landed in a clearing at the edge of the largest remaining settlement, and Owen powered down the engines, and for a moment none of us moved. Cal was looking out the window with an expression I recognized from my own face in mirrors, the expression of someone who had understood a thing intellectually and was now understanding it in a different part of themselves entirely. "All right," I said. We moved. The VETH came to meet us at the edge of the clearing. There were 3 of them, and they stood very still, and the one in front was an elder. I could see that immediately. Not from her size. From the way the other 2 positioned themselves slightly behind her, and from the way she stood, which was the way people stand when they have been carrying something heavy for a long time and have gotten so used to the weight that they have forgotten what it was like before. She looked at us, 4 humans, 1 salvaged freighter, no Accord insignia anywhere on our hull because Owen had always considered insignia a fire hazard and had never installed any. She did not look afraid. She did not look relieved. She looked like a person who has run out of the energy that both of those feelings require. She spoke. The translation unit on my wrist took about 3 seconds, which meant she was using one of the less common regional dialects, and then it rendered her words in flat, even English. "We did not think anyone would come," she said. I looked at her, at the settlement behind her, at the 2 people standing slightly back, watching us with eyes that had clearly been watching empty sky for a very long time. "Honestly," I said, "we weren't supposed to." She looked at me steadily. "But you are here," she said. "We are here," I said. Owen was already moving toward the ship's rear cargo bay. Nina had her cases open. Cal was standing next to me, very still, his new boots quiet for once on the soft ground. The elder watched Owen work for a moment, then she turned back to me. "There are others," she said. "Further north, they have been waiting." "We have room," I said. She nodded once. The weight on her did not lift. It never does, not immediately. But something in her posture shifted, just slightly, the way a person shifts when they finally set something down after a very long time, and their body has not yet figured out what to do without it. I told Owen to prep for a longer stay. He said he had already started. The Veth elder's name was Asha. She told me on the second day, not the first, which I understood. Names are trust, and trust is something you measure out carefully when the universe has given you good reasons to be careful with it. She told me her name the morning after we set up the first supply distribution, when she came to find me sitting outside the ship at dawn with my cold coffee, watching the green tree line in the early light. She sat beside me without being invited, which I respected enormously. "Asha," she said, touching her own chest. "Yale," I said, doing the same. She nodded. She looked at the tree line for a while. "How many of you are coming?" she asked. I paused. "Right now," I said carefully, 4. She was quiet for a moment. "Only 4. "Yes." She accepted that. She did not say anything to make me feel worse about it, which would have been easy and which I would have deserved. She simply sat with it, the way she seemed to sit with everything, with a particular kind of steadiness that was not peace but was something harder than peace. We spent 3 days in the northern settlements before I found the communique. I found it in Asha's records, which she showed me without hesitation when I asked if the Veth had had any contact with the Accord in the past year. She pulled a physical print of it, which told me they had considered it important enough to commit to paper, and she handed it to me with both hands, the way you hand something to someone when you want them to understand that it mattered. It was on official Accord stationery. Full header, seal, reference number, the works, dated 8 months ago, signed by the Deputy Director of the Accord's Emergency Response Division. It informed the Veth people that the Accord had reviewed their situation and was dispatching a relief envoy. The envoy would arrive within 6 to 8 months. In the meantime, the Accord strongly encouraged the Veth to consolidate their remaining population centers and preserve their food supplies accordingly. I read it twice. I read it a third time. "You rationed," I said. "I was not asking." "We rationed," Asha said. "For 8 months, we moved people. We combined the northern and southern communities so that we would be easier to find. We made space." She paused. "We made space," she said again quietly, "for the people who were coming to help." I had nothing to say to that. I put the communique flat on the supply crate in front of me, face up. I looked at it for a long time. The language was very clean, professional. The sentences were well constructed and the tone was warm and carefully calibrated to communicate both urgency and hope. Someone had worked hard on those sentences. Someone had written those sentences, knowing no one was coming. I thought about the food they had rationed, the people they had moved, the space they had made. 112,000 people, arranging their survival around a promise that had been written to buy silence from a committee that had already decided to do nothing. My medic Nina was working in what had been a community storage building, which she had converted into a functioning medical space over about 36 hours on almost no sleep. I could see her through the open door from where I was sitting. She was treating an elderly Veth man for something that would have been a minor condition 6 months ago, and was now more complicated than that. And she was working with the focused quietness of someone who knows they cannot fix everything, and has decided that is not a reason to stop. Cal was helping 2 Veth teenagers carry materials across the settlement. His boots made no noise anymore. I noticed that. The ground here had a particular softness to it, and the squeaking had stopped somewhere in the last 3 days, and I did not think Cal had noticed, but I had. Owen came and stood next to me. He looked at the communique. He did not touch it. He read it where it lay. "Population check," he said. 112, I said, "rounded up." He made a sound that was not really a sound, just breath, shaped in a particular direction. "The file says 600, he said. "The file is old." He looked at the tree line. How old was the analyst note? 8 months. Same as the communique. Yes. Owen was quiet for a long time. "So someone in the Accord knew the real number," he said. "Someone updated the census, and someone still sent this." I picked up the communique. I folded it carefully and put it in my chest pocket, the way you handle something that is going to matter later, in a different room, in front of different people. "Yes," I said. That evening, Ashash showed me the rest of what she had kept, not just the communique. She had records going back 9 years, the full history of their objections, every reference number, every committee acknowledgement, every formal response that said the matter was under review. She had kept all of it, in chronological order, in a waterproof case she carried herself. She had been building this case for 9 years. She handed it to me without explanation, which means she had decided what I was going to do with it before I had. She was right. That night I sat with the records until well past midnight, and Cal came and sat with me at some point, and did not say anything but brought me something warm to drink that was not coffee, but which I was grateful for anyway. And Nina came for a while, and Owen stayed mostly by the ship, monitoring the comms, and around 2 in the morning he called me over and said that Meridian Base had pinged the persistent argument twice asking for a status update. I told him to acknowledge receipt and say we were still in transit. He said we had used that particular cover once already. I said use it again. He did. The next morning I told Asha what I was going to do with her records. I told her clearly, without making it sound larger than it was, because she had dealt with people who made things sound large before, and she deserved honesty more than theater. I told her I was going to send everything to every news frequency that would receive it. The records, the communique, the population figures, both of them side by side. I told her this would cause significant trouble for me and moderate trouble for Owen, and possibly some trouble for Nina and Cal, and that none of us had discussed it formally, but that I was confident in what they would say if I asked. I asked anyway, because that is how you do it properly. Nina said yes before I finished the sentence. Cal said yes with his whole face. Owen said he had already started compressing the files. Asha listened to all of this. Then she asked me one question. "Is this the right thing?" she said. "Not will it work, not will it be enough, just is it right?" "Yes," I said. She nodded. She went back to work. So did I. Meridian Base did not ping us a third time. They called directly. The call came through on the ship's main channel at 600 station time, and the voice on the other end was not Dana Briggs. It was someone higher than Dana Briggs, which meant the situation had moved up the chain faster than I expected, which meant someone had already noticed the persistent argument had not been in transit for 3 days. The voice was formal and precise, and introduced itself as Commander Ellis Ward, Office of Interspecies Compliance, and asked me to confirm my current position and the nature of my presence in the Veth system. I confirmed both. There was a pause. Sergeant Oduya Marsh, Commander Ward said, "You are aware that this system falls outside Earth Fleet's operational jurisdiction?" "Yes," I said. "You are aware that the Galactic Accord has reviewed and declined emergency intervention in this system on 2 separate occasions?" "Yes," I said. "Then I need you to understand the seriousness of—" "I have a document," I said. "I would like to transmit it to you. It is a formal communique issued by the Accord's Emergency Response Division 8 months ago. I believe you will find it interesting." Silence. "Transmit it," he said. I transmitted it. I also transmitted the population figures, both the archived one and the updated analyst note. I transmitted 9 years of Veth objection records and reference numbers and committee responses. I transmitted Nina's preliminary medical assessments, which she had written in plain clinical language that made everything extremely clear. I transmitted Cal's structural survey of the settlement damage, which he had been quietly completing every evening, and which was thorough enough that I suspected he had done it specifically so I would have it. The transmission took 4 minutes. Commander Ward was quiet for a long time after. "This is going to require a formal review," he said. "I understand," I said. "You need to understand the position this puts Earth Fleet in." "I do," I said. "I also understand the position the Accord's communique puts the Veth in. I thought the comparison was worth making available." Another silence, different from the first. "I'm going to need you to stay on comms," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, which was accurate in more than one sense. He ended the call. I went outside. The morning was gray, and the air smelled like the kind of damp that lives in forests. Owen was at the rear of the ship running engine diagnostics, which is what Owen does when he needs to think with his hands. Cal was helping move water containers from the distribution point to the northern end of the settlement. Nina was in her medical space, visible through the door, already working. I transmitted everything to the news frequencies at 700. I did not tell Commander Ward I was going to do this. He had not asked me not to. I considered that sufficient. I sent it to 11 different independent outlets. I also sent it to 3 university research networks, 2 civil advocacy groups, and 1 journalist named Petra Cole who had been covering Accord policy for 6 years, and who I had never met but whose work I had read enough times that I felt like I knew her methods. Petra published within 2 hours. By noon, 7 of the 11 outlets had the story. By mid-afternoon, all 11 did. I monitored the response from the ship's comm station while eating something that technically qualified as lunch. The reaction moved in waves, the way it always does. First confusion, which is when people are reading the documents and making sure they understood. Then outrage, which is when they were sure. Then the specific, louder kind of outrage that comes when people realize the outrage itself had been anticipated and contained within a bureaucratic structure specifically designed to absorb it. The communique was the thing that broke it open. You can argue about cost-benefit analyses. You can argue about jurisdiction and resources and strategic priorities. Those arguments are uncomfortable, but they are familiar, and people know how to have them without anything actually changing. You cannot argue cleanly about a letter telling 112,000 people to make room for help that was never coming. There is no procedural framework for that. There is no committee language comfortable enough to sit next to it. Petra Cole wrote about the letter specifically. She wrote about it clearly and with an economy of language that I respected, and which hit much harder than a longer piece would have. Commander Ward called back at 1600. His voice was different, not warmer, just operating under different conditions. "I want to be clear," he said, "that Earth Fleet's official position is that your presence in this system constitutes an unauthorized incursion, and that the matter is under review." "Understood," I said. "I also want to be clear that 3 independent cargo operators have filed transit notices for the Veth system in the last 4 hours. I was quiet. Unauthorized, I asked. Two of them have filed provisional exemptions. One of them, apparently, has just decided not to file anything. Which one is that? A woman named Grace Hollies. She runs a long-haul cargo operation out of the Europa depot. She is currently 12 hours out, and she sent us a single message which read, "Food and medical supplies. You can find me when I land." I did not say anything. There is also, Commander Ward continued, with the tone of a man reading from a list he had not expected to be as long as it was, a university research vessel from the Aldrin Institute that has requested emergency transit authorization on the grounds of academic necessity, and a private vessel registered to a man named Herbert Acaffer, who describes himself as a concerned citizen, and who appears to have loaded his entire ship with construction equipment. Herbert Acaffer. I had no idea who Herbert Acaffer was. I hoped I would get to meet him. Commander Ward, I said, the Accord's communiqué, has the deputy director responded? A pause. Not publicly, he said. Has anyone from the Accord responded publicly? Two member species have issued statements asking that proper channels be respected. And the species responsible for the extraction operations. A longer pause. They have not issued a statement. No, I said, I expect they haven't. Asha came to find me an hour later. She had heard enough through the translation units we had given her team to understand the general shape of what was happening, even if not every detail. She stood at the doorway of the ship and looked at me with that steady, weight-carrying look. More are coming, she said. Yes, I said. From your planet. From my planet, I said, without permission mostly. She was quiet for a moment. Your people do this, she said. It was not quite a question. More often than our governments would prefer, I said. She looked at the sky, at the direction the ships would come from. The Accord will not like this, she said. No, I said. It will cause problems for you. Yes. She looked at me directly. And you did it anyway. I thought about the coffee I had put down at Kestrel 9. I thought about the 14 months of the signal looping into space. I thought about the small lungs frequency woven into the carrier wave, and the fact that it had taken an accident of posting and an 11-year-old comms habit for anyone to hear it at all. We were going to have the argument eventually, I said, about what the Accord is for, about whether cost-benefit math is the same thing as a decision. I just thought this was a reasonable time to have it. Ashad looked at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Thank you." I did not know what to do with that. I am not good at being thanked. I find it sits in the chest wrong. We haven't fixed anything yet, I said. No, she said, but you came. Grace Hollies landed at 400 the next morning, ahead of schedule. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s, with the particular no-nonsense efficiency of someone who had moved cargo across the outer system for 3 decades, and had therefore developed a comprehensive operational understanding of what actually mattered. She shook my hand. She handed me a manifest. She said, "Tell me where it goes." 2 hours later, the Aldrin Institute vessel landed. 4 researchers, full diagnostic equipment, water purification systems, 2 doctors. Herbert Acaffer landed at noon. Herbert was 67 years old, had made what he described as a reasonable amount of money, doing construction contracts across the inner colonies, and had, upon reading Petra Cole's article, spent approximately 45 minutes being angry, and then spent the rest of that time loading his ship. He had structural repair equipment, water system components, agricultural materials, 3 portable generators, and a very large amount of seed stock that he had apparently purchased from 6 different suppliers at considerable personal expense. He walked down his ramp, looked at the settlement, looked at me and said, "Point me at the worst damage first." I pointed him north. He was already moving before I finished pointing. The Accord contacted me twice that week via official channels. Both contacts were from the compliance office, not Command Ward, which meant the messages were formal and procedural, and asked for documentation of our activities and confirmation that we understood the terms of unauthorized presence in a non-jurisdictional system. I provided the documentation, all of it, every supply manifest, every medical assessment, every structural report. I attached the communiqué to both responses as a standing reference. Neither compliance officer mentioned the communiqué. On the 8th day, Petra Cole published a second piece. This one included a statement from 3 Accord member species who had, apparently, been unaware of the contents of the communiqué and were now formally requesting an emergency session of the full council. On the 9th day, the 2 member species who had originally asked for proper channels to be respected issued a second statement. This one was longer. It used more words to say less. On the 10th day, Commander Ward called me. "The council session is scheduled," he said. "Your presence has been requested." "Mine specifically," I said. "Earth fleets. Given the circumstances, you are Earth Fleet's current most visible representative in this situation." I looked at my uniform, which was technically a civilian jacket over a base layer, because I had not expected to be anyone's representative when I packed. "I'll need a day," I said. "You have too," he said. Owen pressed my spare uniform shirt. He did not make a comment about this. He just did it, with the portable iron he apparently kept in his kit at all times, which I stored as information about Owen that made complete sense. Nina prepared a full medical summary for the council presentation, organized and formatted and clear enough that a committee member who had never seen a sick person could understand it. Cal put together a structural and geographic impact assessment with maps. He had been working on it for days, I realized. He had been expecting this. Before I left for the transit to the council session, Asha came to find me at the ship. Early morning, the tree line dark, the sky just starting to change. She handed me the waterproof case, all 9 years of records, the original. "Take it with you," she said. I held it in both hands. "I'll bring it back," I said. She shook her head just slightly. "Bring something better back," she said. The Galactic Accord Council chamber was large in a way that was clearly designed to make individuals feel appropriately small. I had seen pictures. Pictures do not convey the particular quality of the silence in that room, which is the silence of a space that has hosted a great many important decisions and knows it. There were 22 member species represented, 22 delegations arranged in a curved gallery, each with their translation units and their aides, and their carefully arranged expressions of procedural neutrality. I sat at the single table in the center, which is where they put people who are being addressed rather than people who are doing the addressing. I put the waterproof case on the table in front of me. I put the communiqué on top of the case, face up, visible to the gallery. I did not open with it, I let it sit there. The council session opened with a formal statement from the chair, who outlined the situation in the careful language of institutional bodies that are recalibrating their position in real time. She called it a matter of extraordinary complexity requiring careful deliberation. She called it a situation with significant diplomatic dimensions. She called it many things. She did not call it what it was. I did not correct her yet. The Deputy Director of Emergency Response gave a prepared statement. His language was precise, and his suit was well pressed, and he looked directly at me twice during his statement, which I took as a sign that he was more nervous than his voice suggested. He outlined the 2 review processes. He outlined the cost-benefit determinations. He acknowledged that the analyst note in the population file had represented a provisional figure that had not yet been incorporated into the official record pending verification. Pending verification. I wrote that phrase on my notepad. I underlined it. Then it was my turn. I did not have a prepared statement. I had thought about this carefully and decided that a prepared statement would give people a place to aim their procedural objections, and I did not want to give them that. I said I would like to begin with a question. The chair said I could proceed. When the Emergency Response Division issued this communique, I said, and I lifted it and held it up, not to be dramatic but simply so that every delegation could see it clearly. What was the intended outcome? Silence. I ask because I have read it carefully. It is a well-written document. It is warm in its language. It expresses genuine concern. It specifies a timeline. It gives practical guidance. I set it back down. It does everything a notification of incoming help should do. So I want to understand, when it was written, was the intention to send help, or was the intention to produce a document that resembled the intention to send help? The deputy director's aide leaned over and spoke quietly to him. That is a significant characterization, the deputy director said. It is a direct question, I said. I would appreciate a direct answer. He did not give one. I opened the waterproof case. I did not rush. I took out the records in order, and I laid them on the table one at a time. 9 years of objections. 9 years of reference numbers and committee acknowledgments and responses informing the VETH people that their concerns were under review. I did not read them aloud. There was no need. The delegations in the gallery could see the volume of them. The physical reality of 9 years of paper stacked on a table in the center of their chamber was doing what words would take much longer to do. 112,000 people, I said. That was the actual population when the second review was conducted, not 600,000. The analyst note was in the file. It was provisional pending verification. It has now been in the file for 8 months. I looked at the deputy director. How long does verification take? He said the verification process required cross-referencing with field data from multiple sources. I said, there are 4 human researchers currently on the VETH planet who completed a comprehensive population and health assessment in 6 days. I have their full report if the division would like to use it as a starting point. Several delegations shifted. One delegation, the Korath, who were the species responsible for the extraction operations, had been very still and very quiet since I began. Their lead representative was a large being who held themselves with the specific posture of someone waiting for the part of the proceeding where their position becomes defensible again. I did not think that part was coming. I presented Nina's medical data. I presented Cal's structural assessment. I presented the water contamination reports that had been filed with the Accord across 11 years, and which had been assigned reference numbers and reviewed by subcommittees, and which I could now connect directly to documented health outcomes in the VETH population, because Nina was thorough and Cal's maps were precise. I presented Herbert Ackefer. Not Herbert himself, though I had asked him if he wanted to attend, and he had said he had more useful things to do with his time, which was the most Herbert Ackefer answer possible. I presented his supply manifest as a document. I told the council that Herbert was 67 years old, had no government affiliation, had read a news article, and had within 48 hours loaded a ship with construction equipment and agricultural seed stock at his own expense, and flown it to the VETH system. I'm not presenting Herbert Ackefer as evidence of anything extraordinary, I said. I am presenting him because he is not extraordinary. He is a private citizen who read the same documents you have all now read, and then did what seemed like the obvious thing to do. The question I would like this council to sit with is not why Herbert Ackefer went. The question is why it took Herbert Ackefer. The chamber was very quiet. The 3 delegations that had requested the emergency session, the ones who had been unaware of the communique, were the ones watching me most carefully. They were not watching me the way the Korath delegation was watching me. They were watching me the way people watch something they need to understand, because it is going to require them to make a decision. I spoke for a long time, longer than I had planned. I spoke about the records in the case, about the specific distance between a reference number and a response, about the population figure that had sat in the official file, uncorrected, for 8 months, while the communique went out in careful, warm, professional language to people who rationed their food for 8 months on the basis of it. I spoke about the small lungs frequency in the carrier wave. I spoke about it simply, without building anything around it. Just the fact. The Veth had embedded a frequency for children in the carrier wave of their distress beacon. Narrow frequency, specialized range, the kind of thing you build when you understand that the standard channels might not work, and you are trying every possibility you can think of. They were not expecting anyone to hear it, I said. They built it anyway. The chamber was still. I heard it because I was posted to an outer relay station on a dead-end assignment with a broken coffee machine, and enough time to look carefully at things that the main comms traffic was passing over. That is the only reason any humans are on the Veth planet today. The margin was that thin. The signal was that close to going unanswered. I looked at the gallery, all 22 delegations. I'm not standing here to argue about jurisdiction, I said. Jurisdiction is a tool. It is not a reason. I am standing here to ask this council what the accord is actually for, because I have now read the documents and done the math, and I find that I cannot answer that question on the basis of what I have seen. Maybe one of you can explain it to me. No one explained it. What happened instead was 3 hours of procedural discussion that I was not party to, conducted in the chamber's secondary conference spaces, while I sat in the hall outside and drank terrible coffee from a vending unit and read status updates from Owen, who reported that the persistent argument's engine certification had come through. Finally, 2 weeks late, as though the universe had a sense of timing. At the end of the 3 hours, the council chair came and found me. She told me that an emergency accord resolution was being drafted, that the extraction operations in the Veth system were being suspended pending a full environmental and humanitarian review, that the Veth would be offered formal accord membership, not as a catalog species, not as a protected ward, but as a sovereign people with a full seat and speaking rights, that the communique would be entered into the official record, and that the emergency response division's review processes would be subject to an independent audit. She told me that the 2 member species who had known about the communique had declined to contest the resolution. She told me that my court-martial proceedings, which had been formally initiated by Earth Fleet 3 days ago, would proceed as scheduled. I told her I understood. She looked at me for a moment. This careful, precise woman who ran the proceedings of 22 species, with the particular skill of someone who has learned to hold contradictions without letting them show. You did something significant here, she said. Herbert Acaffer did something significant, I said. I just started a conversation he was going to finish anyway. She almost smiled. Almost. I went back to the Veth planet 3 days before the court-martial. I needed to, in a way I could not have explained procedurally and did not try to. Owen flew me. It was just the 2 of us this time. Nina was staying through the full medical assessment process, which was going to take months. Cal had applied for a formal posting to the Accord's new oversight team, which he was going to get because the application was thorough and his structural survey had been cited in the resolution documents. I landed in the same clearing, same soft ground. The tree line was the same deep green. There were more ships now, not just human ships. 2 other species had sent their own aid teams after the resolution passed, which meant the Veth people were dealing with the logistical complexity of being helped by multiple civilizations simultaneously, which HFY was managing with a particular brisk competence that I found deeply impressive. She found me at the ship, same time of morning, same gray sky. She sat beside me without being invited. We were quiet for a while. She asked me how it had gone. I told her about the resolution, about the seat, about the membership and the audit and the suspension of operations. I told her what it meant in practical terms and what it was still going to require in terms of work and time, and the specific grinding difficulty of turning a resolution into a reality. She listened to all of it. Then she asked the question I had been expecting since the first morning we sat together. "Why did you come?" she said. Not with suspicion, not with distrust, just the genuine, careful inquiry of someone who has been surprised by something and needs to understand it properly. I was quiet for a long time. The tree line was dark and the sky was beginning to change, the first gray shifting towards something that might become light. A bird or something like a bird moved through the upper branches and was gone. "We know what it sounds like," I said, "when no one answers." She looked at me. I did not explain it. I had said what there was to say, and everything underneath it was the kind of thing that does not survive being spoken in full. The recalled mission, the signal that had gone unanswered, the particular weight of a decision that had been made in a committee room by people who would never sit in this clearing or hear a narrow-frequency carrier wave or hold a 9-year stack of reference numbers in their hands. She did not ask me to explain it. She sat with it the way she sat with everything, and after a while she nodded once slowly, and I understood from that nod that she had understood more than I had said, which is how it is with things that matter. I stood up, picked up the waterproof case which she had asked me to bring back and which I was now handing back to her, properly this time with both hands. "For your records," I said. She took it the same way, both hands. Owen was already moving toward the ship, running pre-flight quietly, giving us the time. The morning was getting lighter and the settlement was starting to wake up, and somewhere to the north I could hear Herbert Ackhaffer's generators running, which they had been running continuously for 12 days, steady and reliable and completely unconcerned with jurisdictions. I picked up the structural beam I had been leaning against. Ashab picked up the other end without being asked. We carried it north, toward the sound of work, and neither of us said anything else, and the sky continued getting lighter, and behind us the persistent argument sat quiet in the clearing, waiting, the way good ships wait, ready for whatever came next. The court-martial happened. The charges were read. I pleaded guilty to every one of them with the energy of someone who had already decided, long before walking into that room, exactly who they were and what that was worth. The tribunal deliberated for 6 hours. The charges were dismissed. The official reason entered into the record stated that no existing statute adequately covered the circumstances, and that creating a precedent for punishing actions that had directly contributed to a unanimous accord resolution and the preservation of a sovereign civilization would require a legal framework that the tribunal was not prepared to construct. What it meant, in plain words, was that the paperwork could not catch what I had done and still look like paperwork. They created a new framework that afternoon, quietly, procedurally, in the language of institutions finding their way back to something they had misplaced. I read it later in Owen's ship, heading back out toward the drift. It was about accountability, about the obligation to respond when response is possible, about the difference between a jurisdiction and a reason. It used very clean language. Some of it was even good. I poured myself a cup of coffee and I finished it, which I almost never do, and outside the window the stars were the same as they always are, indifferent and enormous and absolutely full of signals if you know how to listen. I listened,